What's up, folks? How's it going? This is Waj. Hope you guys are all doing well. Now, we've been doing some testing with the new Google Pixel Slate, and like the iPad Pro and Surface Pro 6, this is ushering a new era of what I'm going to call ultra tablets, where there's a blending of the tablet form factor and the capabilities of a laptop, usually coupled with a nice keyboard and trackpad attachment and some sort of stylus. Now, the Google Pixel Slate certainly follows that formula fairly well. I want to compare it against probably the best ultra tablet out there, the iPad Pro 12.9-inch version. We're going to be taking a look at the key differences and similarities between the two and determine which one comes out on top, all things considered. So let's get right into it. Now, Google has been developing the Pixel Slate for a number of years. In fact, it's been over 3 years since they came out with a dedicated tablet device. And what the Slate delivers is basically the Pixel Book experience, but in a tablet form. And with the popularity of the Microsoft Surface Pro 6 and iPad Pro, not only does the Pixel Slate bring that level of build quality associated with those tablets, but it has a whole different operating system with Chrome OS. Now, firstly, when it comes to price and the model configuration, the iPad Pro is fairly simple. You're looking at $799 and $1,000 for the 11 and 12.9-inch models respectively, and you can obviously upgrade the internal memory if you so desire. The Pixel Slate is a little bit more complicated. The entry-level model coming with an Intel Celeron processor, 4 gigabytes of RAM, and 64 gigabytes of internal storage, which retails for about $599, all the way up to the Intel Core i7 version of that CPU, which comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of internal storage. Now, the configuration that we have for this video is the 12.9-inch version of the iPad Pro paired with the Apple Smart Keyboard and Pencil, which comes to a grand total of about $1,330. The Pixel Slate setup that we have over here is with the Intel M3 processor, and with the native keyboard cover and a Pixel Book pen, you're looking at about $1,100 for our particular setup over here. And even though this configuration of the Pixel Slate is slightly cheaper than the iPad Pro, keep in mind that with the Core i7 version of the Slate paired with the accessories, you could be spending close to $2,000 for a setup like that, which is laptop grade money, and we should expect to see that level of versatility and capabilities, but we'll come back to performance in a little bit. Let's talk about design first. In terms of construction, both have aluminum unibody designs. They both feel very premium in the hand, but in terms of dimensions, one of the great things about the new iPad Pro is the ultra thin bezels, and that's certainly a big trend of this current design up of smartphones, tablets, and even laptops. And this is where the Pixel Slate from the front side feels a little bit more dated compared to the ultra low profiles that we're seeing on smartphone, tablets, and laptops. And even though the larger borders on the Pixel Slate don't really detract too much from the display, it's just nice to have thinner bezels, and it seems to be the way forward going into 2019. Now, in terms of thickness and weight, the iPad Pro is also thinner at 5.9 millimeters versus 7 millimeters on the Slate, and it's also about 100 grams lighter as well, which definitely makes a difference in the hand. Now, saying that, there are some hardware specialty features that the Slate offers that you don't find on the iPad Pro. Firstly, you have a fingerprint scanner on the power standby button, which is a nice biometric way to unlock and to get access to your device. You also have 2 USB-C ports on either side of the device, which is cool if you want to plug in to charge the tablet and then use the other port to connect USB thumb drives, external displays, or even third-party peripherals such as a keyboard and mouse if you don't want to use the native Google keyboard and trackpad cover. But if you were to get the $200 keyboard attachments, one of the things that's nice about it is it actually looks and feels like a regular keyboard that you would find on a laptop with large proportional key configuration and spacing. And even though it has rounded keycaps, it's still fairly comfortable to type on even for prolonged periods of time. Plus, at the top of the keyboard, you'll find an extra row of keys specific to Chrome OS, so you'll find functions like escape, back, refresh, notifications, etc. And at the bottom, there's even a dedicated Google Assistant key, which is pretty handy as well. On the other hand, the keyboard cover on the iPad Pro is certainly not as capable, doesn't feel as comfortable to type on, and is generally a lot more bare bones than what we find on the Pixel Slate side. Furthermore, I'm also liking the Slate's multi-touch trackpad. It feels super responsive and tactile. It even has a mechanical click functionality, which more or less makes it feel more like a laptop than a tablet. In fact, after a while, while of using the keyboard cover, I barely use the touchscreen, which is certainly not the case on the iPad since iOS has no cursor or mouse functionality natively supported. And since Chrome OS is based off a Linux distribution, you get a level of control and fine movement that is simply hard to replicate with the operating system that primarily uses touch. Now, then again, if you do want fine control of the iPad, certainly one of its highlights definitely has to be the new Apple Pencil. Not only does it have a greater level of sensitivity and articulation compared to the Pixelbook pen, but it feels a lot more responsive and there's less issues of latency going from app to app compared to the Pixel Slate, which struggles with certain applications that are not fully optimized for pen use specifically. Furthermore, Apple has integrated the stylus in a lot more thoughtful way. They've kind of copied the Microsoft Surface tablets where there's a magnetic latching system so you won't lose it like you will on the Pixel Slate, which has no such integration, which definitely makes the integration of this pen feel more of an afterthought, but there are some neat things you can do with it. I like the fact that you can circle and highlight words or pictures to get more information via the Google Assistant, which is definitely a neat feature that I found myself using from time to time. Now moving on, let's talk about the display quality on both tablets. Now in terms of resolution, we're looking at a higher native pixel count, about 3000 by 2000 on the Slate, has a PPI pixel density count about 293, which is actually pretty insane. It's actually higher than what we found on the iPad Pro. But that being said, I think in terms of the visual experience, you don't find a greater level of sharpness or clarity. I think past around 264 PPI there really doesn't make too much of a difference in terms of how many pixels you can see unless you're like 2 millimeters close to the display. But more importantly, in terms of viewing angles, color rendition, and brightness, I think the iPad Pro has the superior display in those categories. Furthermore, in terms of the audio experience, I think the Pixel Slate, even though it has less speakers, because the speakers are facing towards you, one of the reasons why the bezels on it are a little bit thicker, to my ears, the speakers reproduce a little bit more presence and dynamic range in the audio quality compared to the sideways firing speakers on the iPad Pro. If you want to use wired headphones without an adapter, you're out of luck on both platforms, and we have 3 microphones on the iPad Pro versus 2 mics on the Slate. Now moving on, let's talk about the internal capabilities and performance levels of both devices. As we mentioned before, there's a number of different processor options available on the Slate, ranging from the Intel Celeron processor all the way up to the Core i7 CPU. All of these CPUs are actually dual core, but they range in terms of turbo frequencies. Now we have the Core M3 8100Y chip, which has integrated 615 graphics, 8 gigabytes of RAM. With the iPad Pro, you're looking at the juggernaut of the mobile CPU and GPU world, the Apple A12X processor, which is an octa-core CPU and has 7 core graphics. We have 4 gigabytes of RAM, and this particular version of the iPad Pro has 64 gigabytes, but you can get the one with 1 terabyte, which also has 6 gigabytes of RAM, interestingly enough. Now, if you take a look at the Geekbench score, comparing our M3 Intel processor compared to the A12X, you're going to see that there's no contest over here. Essentially, the A12X is anywhere between 2.5 to 3 times faster. If we take a look at even the Core i7 version of the Slate, it's still 2.5 times slower than what we have on the Apple A12X, despite costing a whole lot more than the iPad Pro. So arguably, we are running different platforms, iOS versus Chrome OS, but you do have to consider that the level of transistors and the sheer processing power and capabilities that we have on the Apple A12X is, at this point, is completely in a league of its own and unmatched by any other mobile platform. And I was actually running a video alongside running another application on the Slate, and it felt a little bit more sluggish compared to just running one application versus on the iPad Pro. You could be running dozens of applications in the background, running out a 4K video, doing anything, and you'll never find it ever slowing down. So it's definitely a lot more capable and internally more powerful. Furthermore, in terms of the camera configuration, we have 8 megapixel front to back cameras on the Slate. There are different sensors, a little bit larger sensor on the back with a larger aperture lens on on the Slate, and on the iPad Pro you have a 7 megapixel front-facing camera and a 12 megapixel rearward-facing camera. There are some limitations in terms of video capabilities on the Slate. You can only record up to 1080p, so there's no 4K video capabilities, versus you have no such limitations on the iPad. Basically, the 12 megapixel sensor is very similar to what you'll get on an iPhone, and in terms of video and photo quality, based on my experience, the iPad has the superior rear-facing camera. And lastly, in terms of battery performance, in terms of sheer capacity, the Slate actually has the larger battery size, about 48 watt hours versus 36.7 watt hours on the iPad. But we did a video playback test on the iPad and the same test on the Pixel Slate, and we got a total runtime about 12 hours 51 minutes on the iPad Pro versus about 10 hours 14 minutes on the Slate. Now, of course, as we always mention, a video playback is not indicative of real-world battery performance, but based on our day-to-day experience, we did find that the iPad Pro lasted a couple of hours longer based on our particular user profile. Now, to conclude, I think the Pixel Slate is certainly pretty promising, but there's some major issues with it for sure, both in terms of hardware and software. In terms of hardware, it's definitely not as fast as the Apple A12X chip as we demonstrated, and certainly right now the iPad Pro is the most fastest Ultra tablet in the market right now. That's pretty much unquestionable. And in terms of the software side of things, Chrome OS is pretty promising. It's certainly very capable and has come a long way since a couple of years ago. But I think it's still kind of premature, and the adoption phase is fairly limited. I am a fan of the fact that you can run the entire Chrome desktop app on it, and it looks very much similar to any kind of laptop that you would find across the board. But of course, it's not running Windows, so it's not really a full laptop, and it has some serious limitations there. But in certain areas, as we demonstrated, it's a little bit more flexible than the iOS platform that the iPad Pro is limited to right now. But besides that, guys, that's really it. Definitely give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and let me know if you want to see a three-way comparison between these two and the Microsoft Surface Pro 6. Love to do that video for you guys if you're interested, of course. Other than that, make sure you have notifications turned on so that way you get our videos once they become available. And I want to thank you guys so much for your support. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you real soon. Take care.